Hello, care leaders. My guest today is John Godden. John Godden is somebody that I've known for a long time and I have a great amount of appreciation for, so I've been looking forward to recording today's podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building Salutem care and education. For those of you who don't know John, he's the founder and chief executive of Salutem, which provides care and support services for children and adults in residential homes, day centres and schools. John founded Salutem in 2016 with the ambition of building an organisation that would provide a strong culture of care. John has succeeded in his ambition and built a multi-award winning organisation that is recognised as one of the UK's top employers. An interesting fact about John is that despite his fantastic achievements, John's mother still doesn't think that what he's done is very impressive. But then again, maybe that's why John's so successful. Interesting things that you can learn from this episode include why buying businesses that needed turning around has been essential to part of the Salutem strategy, how care organisations can easily get derailed if their investors and their banks aren't aligned with their care operations, how Salutem's philosophy of fairness has helped their team build a culture that benefits both their team and their residents, and also why appointing Kirsty, Salutem's Chief People Officer, was one of the most important hires that John has ever made, and the story behind being awarded an MBE in the Queen's New Year's Honours List for services to the care sector during the pandemic. My name is Simon Parker, and this is the Care Leaders Network podcast. So without further ado, please welcome John Godden. John, why was it so important for you personally to build a care and education business?
I found myself looking at care as a sector just over 10 years ago, having left the city, and obviously came with all the preconceptions that you get when you don't really know. So, lots of elderly care focused thoughts, big old ex-stately homes with 1980s built wings and lots of nurses running around feeding people, cleaning up after people, all that kind of stuff. I had some knowledge that the revenue streams on it were quite interesting, which the statistician in me sort of liked. So scratched in a little bit further, initially got involved actually in that element, that niche, and then found specialist care, which was a whole different world and just fascinating. And, as an outsider, you'd sort of seen bits of it, sort of awareness a little bit of what was being done for people with complex needs, be they physical or mental. But to actually get in and see that in action was quite something. And when you find out that pretty much all the provision for that in the UK is private and requires capital funding from private sources, that's when the light bulb goes on. And what became obvious to me is there was a lot of really, really good people doing some great stuff, but actually it was still quite mum and pop, and the sorts of financial rigor and systems rigor that should be helpful if done right and should actually add to the effectiveness of the experience weren't being done. So I thought, hold on a minute, myself and my chums, we can do money and systems and that sort of stuff. If we can hook that in with people who have good care cultures, that could be bingo. That could be fantastic. So, yeah, that was the original thought. And then, having sort of seen it in action, I can't understand how anybody would not get drawn in by it, because it's one of those things that it's difficult. It's hard to get right, but when you get it right, it's magic. And, you come across people who've got all sorts of complex challenges in their lives and yet have, really, really great outcomes and great focuses and just try harder and do better than I ever did. And you just think, well, that's just brilliant. Let's get involved in that. And then, of course, there are the elements of seeing what happens when it goes wrong. And actually, that's quite a motivator as well, to be the ones who get it right as much as we can. We're not perfect. And to be a provider that is solid and resilient and capable and gives great outcomes. If nothing else, just to make sure that where the people are not succumbing to bad care. So yeah, that's what sucked me in to begin with. Education, that's a different thing. That was an accident, and it's brilliant. I love it.
Well, we'll get into both of those in a bit more detail. But your whole world prior to that was the mergers and acquisitions and private equity world, if I'm right.
No,
Talk me
actually, no, a
through, I
little
guess.
different. I was a derivatives trader for some years,
Okay.
doing structured derivatives in the city. Then I got into hedge funds, so did that for a decade, which was again fun. Um, and trying to justify that to my mum as to why that was in any way meaningful and a useful thing to be doing and in any way helpful to anybody was difficult to justify. But it was great fun. I loved it. And yeah, but I ran my course on that, did enough of that, and needed to do something that was a bit more human focused.
Hmm. I can really connect with that. Most people that will be watching this probably know that my world was as a technology headhunter for the first part of my career. I got to 30. Me and Sarah had bought a lovely flat in London that overlooked the river, and on paper there was that feeling of that we should feel kind of more successful. At that point, we should have made it. I just felt empty. I felt really, really empty, and that was the thing that got me set up in the care sector because I was like, right, I want to go and do something more meaningful. And it
Yep.
was a big about turn. I'm sure you had all sorts of people in your life going, oh, hang on a minute, like how did that happen? What do you know? What do you know that's going to make you capable of doing that type of stuff? But like you've alluded to, you get stuck into it and you get drawn to it and you learn and you develop and you get
Yep.
better about it. And at some point, you get pretty good and you start doing exciting things and you start making an impact. And that's the bit that it sounds like both of us have kind of shared a different but similar experience in that respect.
Yeah, and it is very, very nice when all is said and done, when you've dealt with, whether it's, you know, refinancing your senior debt or a property issue, or you've got, your HR people have got some thorny issue you've got to get into, or a system implementation has got all of those things, which are normal to any business, really. But at the end of the day, having dealt with those things, knowing that right at the end of that is somebody being enabled to have a great life. That's kind of cool. That's good. That, I mean, I'm not the one who can do that. I've not had the privilege of being a full-time carer, although I do. I try and do about once a month a whole day in a service of doing a shift, which is great. I'm a bit rubbish and they have to help me out, but being part of the chain that enables that is very satisfying. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. Like, so you've gone through this fairly significant personal transformation to go from the finance world into the care world, and of course, then subsequently education as well.
Yeah.
What was it that you were setting out to achieve when you first got started? What was the vision that you had in your head?
Actually, when we set up Salutem, it was initially done. We came a little bit from a negative place, actually, which was we'd seen some structures that really we felt were how not to do it, and that the organisation was working against the front line, not with or enabling the front line. So we very much set out with a vision of making sure that that was reversed, that we wanted an organisation where all of these boring but necessary head office functions, the finance, the estates, the HR, the systems, etc., were there to support the front line, not to undermine it. And so that was a very big motivation. And then immediately you get into the issues of scale. If you are actually going to have an organisation that really supports and builds around the manager of an individual home and enables them to do the things that they need to do really well, you've got to have scale quite quickly. So you've kind of got two choices. One, start small, build up, keep everything very, very tightly controlled, but literally do it one at a time. Or you go in and buy a portfolio that gives you scale straight away, but necessarily comes with a whole bag of problems that you've got to sort out, as well as some good stuff. And so we decided that that's what we would do, and we would we'd create scale and use scale for everybody's benefit. That was really a big flag that we sort of stuck in the business straight away.
And I guess the point around having the scale is so that you've got more support structure, more available income to be able to reinvest in training and systems and processes and all of the infrastructure stuff that
Yeah,
might otherwise have been lacking previously. And also invest in culture. I know obviously
yeah,
that's a massive part of the focus for you and the team. It
yeah,
makes me think about some of my management consultancy days going into services, and maybe it was a new owner, or there'd been kind of a change in their leadership structure, something along those lines. And where you have, I can imagine this is probably something that you experienced. You change things in a really positive direction, but then often because the people have been I guess so used to maybe a more maybe not so empowering culture, let's say, there's almost like a sense of what are they up to? Is this
oh
almost
yeah,
like, is this a trap we're gonna fall into? And then you'll see the various different team members. Some will get it straight away, some will take a little while, some of them will resist almost right until the last minute. But you get to the point where everyone was like, actually, we get it, and this sounds really
yeah.
exciting. We now want to be a part of this because we can see that we're doing it together, rather than, again, that kind of two opposite factions almost battling against each other, which nobody wins in that set of circumstances. Not to mention the fact that it sounds horrifically stressful for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we wanted to create this culture where, I mean, really, the focus was around the manager of the service, right? So if you're a manager of a service, what do you need? What do you actually need? Not what does the organization tell you you need. What do you actually need? And what you need is, if you have got a thorny HR issue, you've got somebody who perhaps is long-term sick. What you need is somebody who can help you out with that, give you that advice. If something breaks, if you have a power outage because a mouse is bitten through your cables, which has happened to me this morning. Again, you've got somebody that can immediately help you out with that. If you've got a problem with one of your vehicles, somebody can. So build everything culturally around that and make it that the service really drives the what's done, rather than the other way around, which is what you can get in some corporates. But you're quite right. When you first take over a service, the fact that you have set it up that way and you really have got the best intentions to support them, that gets lost, because you've got to build trust first. Um, and the hardest one we did was when we took over a charity. So everybody in that charity, well, actually, no, quite a lot of them worked for it because it was a charity. And that was a conscious decision on their part. They did not want to work for what is technically a for-profit organization. And so that immediately creates some barriers and some baggage. So you walk into that with your best intentions and your culture that we know is better than the culture they've had under the charity model, but that's not enough. You've got to prove it, and you've got to illustrate it to them, and you can only do that through high levels of communication. But you talk about the different personalities. Some people would just go, "Oh yeah, okay, fair enough," and then there'll be one or two who really sort of dig their heels in, and they're not going to buy into you. And they're the ones that I find really interesting. They're the ones that we target, because to me, they're the litmus about whether
Mm.
we've got it right or not. The ones who just accept, just go, yeah, no, fair enough, great, off you go. Well, we haven't had to prove ourselves. There's no value, or there's lower levels of value um, in what they have to say. The value is all in the ones who are difficult to win round. And in everything we've taken over, we've managed to identify these characters. And they're the ones we work really closely with. And they tend to be the ones that I've got a very, very heightened sense of what's really good for the people that we're caring for.
Mm.
They're usually quite purist about that. and they're defensive about it, and that's great. So then we've got to justify why we can be the proprietor of that business. And if we can win them round, we're then in a really, really good place. There were a couple of characters when we took over Scope. There were some characters there who, if you cut them in two, they'd be Scope through and through. They utterly believed in that model of care delivery for people with cerebral palsy. And to be fair to that organisation, it did incredible things for decades. Some really incredible things, but they'd lost their direction and mojo in the latter years. But these individuals were so passionate about protecting the interests of those in their care, and indeed colleagues around them, that we had to really work for it to really get their buy-in. And there was one or two of them that we identified early as being that litmus. And we focused upon, okay, what is it that they want to see, they need to see from us, that will convince them that we are actually well-meaning good guys? And that was our approach. And it's not easy, it takes a bit of time, but I've always found that when you win them round, they then become incredibly passionate advocates of ours, and that's brilliant.
I was gonna say they the character profile that you're describing are often some of the most influential people in a care setting,
Yeah,
and they're deeply passionate, and the passion that's coming across that might kind of come across as being almost like having like a little bit of friction. It's because they believe so passionately in what they believe. As you say, it's awesome though. It'd be very easy to fall into the trap of saying, "Oh well, they're just they're problem causers and all of that type of stuff."
yeah,
Actually, it's that level of advocacy that you want to build into the culture of the organization, because if you can stand shoulder to shoulder with those folks and work
yeah.
together, they're going to be the people that are going to be pushing the standards that you collectively agree on, and as such they're the people who are going to be the bastions of the culture that you're looking to have permeate throughout the organization. So real powerful stuff.
Yeah, and you just don't fight them. I mean, I think the natural thing is when you've got somebody coming at you saying, you're a bunch of bankers, you're just going to be stripping money out of the business, you're going to be disabling us from providing great care, you don't get it, look at you guys. If you fight them, you're going to lose. And you'll lose them, which is really not good, because generally they're very good at what they do. So you have to engage, and that can be difficult. And it is a battle of sorts, because you've got to win them round. But to go toe to toe into battle with them is the wrong strategy. It's engagement, it's listening, and always we look for an opportunity to really demonstrate that we've listened to them, to actually do something that they have suggested, because that really illustrates. So if you listen closely, they've probably got an idea that you've not had, a way of doing something that makes a lot of sense that you've not thought of. And if you can use that and demonstrably do it as a reaction to what they've said, that is incredibly helpful. And also it means that you end up doing things better. So win-win.
I Referencing my management consultancy days again, doing that is one of the most powerful things that you can do. But that was almost where the things that we saw time and time again would be, because that hadn't been part of the culture previously, this kind of let's collaborate on stuff, let's talk through the things that you think that would make the biggest difference. It would start to people would start to see that as almost being a trap that they could fall into, because they thought that might be a stick that could be used to beat them later on down
Yeah.
the line, which obviously hopefully a metaphorical stick rather than a real one, of course. But that was that's what they've been used to in the
Yeah.
past. And this
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
refreshing idea, actually we can genuinely work together, and you probably know way more about this stuff than we do. We just want to create an environment for you to succeed. And it's that, oh, okay, however long it takes, it's that, oh, okay, good. Well, let's crack on with it then. And again, you've got
Yeah.
there's a spectrum of different people on that journey as well, who will pick it up at different times, and a different approach
Yeah.
will be needed to get them there. So
Yeah. I mean, obviously now we have credentials around that. We can point to things and say, well, go and talk to those people because they've been through it for years and they know us and they know what we're like. In the early days, of course, we didn't have that. And, we had to prove it by other means. The first thing we did was to buy two businesses concurrently. but we had no credentials, and so we really had to work hard with that. And we had to be present. We had to go and visit the homes a lot, listen to them, and it takes time. I mean, one of them, I remember there was a lady in the finance team of one of the businesses who'd been so used over many years. It was a business doing incredible things in care, but it had no money. So its constraint was it didn't have the money to do the great things it was doing. And so the answer to anything involving money was no, 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 no. So this particular individual, that was the mindset. It was any request for expenditure, no, no, no. And we're going, yeah, but we want to be doing that. We want to be investing and increase, in doing the estates and investing in the things that they need on the front line. And you're not even bringing it to us because you're saying no at your level. And it probably took a year actually to break her out of that. She's now she's now absolutely one of our key people, and has recently won in our annual award. She won the what we call the Chairman's Award, which is the person who is most influential in around a business. So back to this thing that if you turn those ones that are most passionate and most focused, if you get them to buy into you, they become absolutely the winners.
What was it that did you go into the business thinking that the undergoing some type of turnaround was the thing that you wanted to get started with? Was that always part of the
Yeah,
plan? Because that seems to have been a bit of a consistent theme in the acquisitions that you have done.
yeah, and look, I mean, the nice soft answer is, wouldn't it be lovely to take a business that is doing good, carey things, but needs some more money to sort of move that on? But the actual answer is, if you take a business that has been, be a little bit careful here, a bit lazy in its approach, the ability to move that on and be more ambitious about that care that's provided, there's a lot more. There's a lot more upside in that. So
Mm,
the banker answer is, if you buy stuff that's already doing great, where's the upside? If you buy stuff that could be great but isn't yet, there's a lot of upside. So there was a
mm,
conscious decision to do that. Buy stuff that should be and could be great but isn't yet. And there needed to be a constraint in place, either some cultural constraint, more likely a monetary constraint. So they didn't have sufficient capital and other resources to move things on. So there needed to be some sort of constraint that, when released, and obviously we had to know we could release that, but when those constraints were removed, the upside would then be significant. So yeah, turnaround was always the objective. We never wanted to buy stuff that was already brilliant, and which is it's a great business model. Just that's not us. Don't do that.
got you, got you. Obviously, that comes with some challenges.
Oh yeah.
What do you what do you do?
uh,
What do you do from like from a resident team and from a team well-being? I guess let's go residents first. So talk to me about what does that mean? You've done the deal, and as you've mentioned before, sometimes there's some friction there. But talk me through what that looks like, and what were you looking to implement to make better?
well, stability is the issue, right? And particularly in specialist care, you're dealing with people over very, very long timelines, and stability is crucial. With people who that is the fundamental to their life. They need that stability, and most of the organisations we bought, that stability was threatened in various ways. Scope, particularly, or had been embarking on a program of significant closures, and that's horrible. I mean, truly horrible as an experience for the individuals affected and their families. So, of course, our number one aim was to instill that stability. Look, the home that you live in, it's not going anywhere. You can carry on living here. The school that you get your child educated in, with the conductive education for cerebral palsy or whatever the specialism that's relevant is, that's going to stay open. So that in itself was a very, very powerful key to a lot of things. Actually, there was a service I went to a couple of weeks ago, which was one of the Scope portfolios. Bunch of guys who'd been living there for 20 years. It's their home. Quite eloquent, some of them. And one of them was sort of following me around. He said, "So you the new owner?" Yeah, we're just about to buy it. Says, and he looked at me. He was quite anxious, and he said, "So when you buy it, yeah, does that mean I've got to move out?" And I said, No, I'm buying it so you don't have to move out. That's the whole point. And yeah, that ran deep. That was it. That was the point of the exercise, to do that.
Mm.
And the promise that we made, and in the Scope deal, which was a very open deal, everybody knew about it as it was occurring. The promise we made to the families, the staff, the individuals we support, was that we would do everything we could to provide continuity of care. And here we are, six years later, and there was one day service that didn't make it. Everything else we've kept, and that was the point of the exercise. So you have to shield when you're well. We as a sector, if you look at it from a business perspective, the job that we all have is to keep the individuals that we're supporting at the front end safe, secure, and comfortable. So even if you've got problems at a corporate level, you've got to immunise them from that. We took over a charity just coming up 2 years ago down in Cornwall, which had some dreadful, dreadful issues. Cornwall Commission has asked us to step in. 56 very, very complex people. Moving them would have been so detrimental to their well-being. It would have been awful. And there were some big issues. There were 13 services, and I think at the time 9 were either RI or inadequate. So the CQC were not happy, rightly so. So lots and lots of issues to deal with there. But you go into the homes and you talk to the individuals being supported, they actually weren't that aware of a lot of that stuff. We all knew. Anybody looking at that business knew there was a lot of problems. There were some practices that really that shouldn't be being used anymore. But actually, they were immunised from it. And what we ended up doing with the commissioners and with the CQC was allowing that to continue. So there was an awful lot of problems happening at the corporate level, but actually the individuals being supported were ultimately immunised from that. And that's so important to do. It was close, but had that closed down, 56 super complex people to be moved quickly, that's destructive, to say the least. But everybody did a great job, and we managed to turn that around, and it's now doing really well at every level. But if you ask an individual in one of those services what's happened in the last 3 years, hopefully they won't really know a lot of that, which is good.
So the immunisation has worked successfully.
Yeah.
And
I mean, their families obviously knew about it, but a lot of those had really complex needs, so their level of engagement was lower than average. But even so, being able to keep them isolated from the unhappiness, but they were all threatened with with having to be moved, whether they knew it or not. But luckily, that didn't come to pass. And if anything motivates myself and my colleagues, that's a big motivator.
I was going to say, like, what does that mean to you on a personal level when you get that payoff of being able to effectively save an organisation that otherwise would have had such catastrophic impacts for the people living in the services?
Well, I mean, that's it, isn't it? I mean, that's the difference between what I do now and working in the city. And we had a lot of issues. I mean, simple things like, Lang Buisson published their report, and our metrics around CQC compliance are lower than some of our peers. And, that sort of hurts because I'm competitive. But of course, the reason for that was, we took on 13 services that were RI and inadequate, and turned them around. But obviously that doesn't happen immediately. So, you have all that hassle and aggro and whatever, but still I got a smile on my face because I know the individuals at the bottom of that who are absolutely the object of the whole exercise. And I know that they're in a better place because what myself and my colleagues did. And we'll take a bit of pain on that. And that's fine. And look, I mean, that particular one was a little bit worse financially than we thought. Cost us about 1.5 million more than we thought it would. So there's a bit of pain there. You deal with that. But if it were widgets, you wouldn't bother, would you? But because it's humans, you do, because you then get that wonderful feedback loop, and then the stories that come through, and we get thank you letters, letters of praise, which are brilliant. It's always very easy to write an angry letter of complaint, isn't it? But to write a letter, which you don't really have to do, to praise the staff team and praise an organisation that's helped your son or daughter, and that's really, really good. And yeah, it does. I mean, it makes it, you walk a bit taller, and everything's great, right?
Talk to me more about the team side of things, because we've touched upon that a little bit. But one of the things that I think that Salutum was an early, let's say almost an early pioneer of. So there is a trend in the care sector of having a chief people officer.
Yeah,
Lots of bigger organisations have HRDs, but
yeah,
it's not until it's fairly recently. It hasn't been often the case that having a chief people officer has been part of the gig. And I kind of get the impression that that was something that you were one of the first movers on that. And obviously, I'm close to Kirsty. I have great admiration for her. She's a
yeah,
wonderful person, and does I know a lot about the journey that she's been on personally, and then about the kind of the team that she's built and all of the incredible stuff that she's her and her team have managed to achieve. It's a big bold move, but I think it was quite a rare move as well. So talk to me about that, I guess, from in the context of kind of people and HR, and then what that then relates to from, so you've done the deal, now what in that sense?
Look, I've still got the breakdown of the head office budget for Salutum day one. So we bought Pathways 42 homes, Modus 11 homes. Modus came with a bit of a head office function. Pathways didn't. So we had this head office, and we'd hired a chief exec actually to run it. So they put together this list of all of the personnel they needed for head office to manage this 53 home group spread across the country. So of course you've got a CFO, obviously, and there's a chief exec, and there was a head of quality. So yeah, that's all right. There was a head of estates, but there was no HR, none. That first cut, no HR, and I think both of the companies, actually, Modus had an HR team, but that departed. I think Pathways had sort of outsourced it, Pinnacle, something like that. So you'd outsourced your HR device. And I remember looking at that going, hold on a minute, but the product here is people looking after people. If your product was software, you'd have a CTO. So anyway, that was the original budget. And of course, in those early days, money was tight, so you couldn't sort of throw everything at it. So it wasn't an obvious thing to do. But it probably took a couple of months to figure out that that was a glaring error to not have an HR person in a business that's all about people. So having not had it for a few months probably is what triggered the reaction to go the other way. And to not only have a HR manager, but to actually have an HR leader who sat alongside the CFO and the CQO and the CEO. And that is as we've done it since that moment. And to me, a business like ours, to not have people, HR and its ancillaries, at the heart of your decision making is, I just think you're set to fail, actually. So we separated out our management structure about, actually coming up 3 years ago now. So we span out the executive function from the management function. So the executive function, you squeeze that down. That's strategy and oversight, essentially. and then you have your SLT, which is your doing function. So we get to decide what to do and how to do it and set the KPIs, and then the SLT, which is much bigger, get to execute. Hopefully, and it has done, it shortens decision making lines. So then the debate is that group exec. What is it? Of course, it's the CEO. It's always the CFO. CQO, so quality oversight, probably got to have that at the group exec level, not the SLT. And then there was a debate about CPO, and to me it was freaking obvious. It was just, look, of course the CPO has to be up at that level, not at the doing level. And that was probably key to how we go about things, having that voice of in-depth knowledge of HR and what we've got to do, both technically and also culturally with our people, to make ourselves function well. So yeah, I mean, Kirsty, her office is next to mine, which is risky, but it's purposeful. And actually, I always think that if anything that you want to do as an organisation, it's all well and good to want to do it and to have it as a policy or a protocol or whatever, but it's how you set it up physically that actually works. And so the fact that the CPO office is directly next to the CEO and the CFO, I think really illustrates how we go about things.
I hope that others see what you've done, and that there are a few other organisations as well that got the CPO model. I know Caroline Roberts at Aria Care. She's got Kelly Howell in the CPO role as well. So it's not that it's not happening. I just wish it was happening more, and for all of the reasons that you've highlighted as well. Obviously, I'm not saying that every organisation needs to have a CPO, but to have that kind of senior representation in any size of organisation where the people and the HR is taken seriously to a point that there's a level of investment and that it's a really, really important consideration for making all of those key decisions it's just really, really important. So good on you for being one of the early movers on that one. And I think it's
entirely selfish. It's entirely selfish, but look, I mean, it is a reflection of how we see things, and we do see our whole organisation as we are paid money to provide care for complex individuals. So we obviously care for them, but we also care for the 3,000 colleagues. And there's not a lot of difference in how seriously we take those two things. So I actually find it obtuse that in a care organisation where the fundamental thing you do is look after other humans, that you don't also have that approach to the humans that you pay in the same way as the ones you are paid to look after. And even though they haven't got the complex needs of the people we're paid to look after, they're humans and they have all of their issues and foibles and requirements and needs, and we've got to recognise that to enable them. So again, we can sort of say, well, we care about our staff. You can say that, anybody can say that. It's what you do about it and how you structure yourself. So every decision we make, by having a CPO where that person sits, Kirsty in our case, every decision we make has got the colouring of, well, what does that do for our staff attached to it, and that helps, and the staff see it and they feel it, and that means that our turnover is lower than average, that we hopefully have got a happier, more effective staff team. And we got some metrics to show that absolutely works.
Whilst we were describing that, then another CPO sprung to mind, and that's Leah Smith, the Chief People Officer at Barclay Care Group. We were chatting about this the other day. We were talking about empowering neuro-inclusivity in the workplace. So supporting people who are maybe autistic or maybe have ADHD or something along those lines. That was the kind of the premise of the podcast. And something struck me whilst we were talking, or maybe I'd thought about it before. But anyway, we ended up bringing it up in the podcast. It's person-centered leadership. You're understanding that person as a whole and appreciating them and valuing for them for them as a person and their and all of their characteristics, and empowering them and giving them the best possible environment. And it's the same as care. As you say, there's real flow through. Obviously, the kind of the context is different, but fundamentally, you're looking after people and making sure that they're all right.
But they are the ultimate experts by experience, also. And if they have got issues that they've had to contend with themselves that are in some way not dissimilar to those that we're providing as our service, well, I mean, that's a great insight to have. So to enable somebody who's got neurodiversity or physical disability to be able to work alongside colleagues who haven't seen that is crucial. And we got some fascinating individuals that we support and have stayed in the organisation. In our schools, we've got a number of former pupils, so individuals who've got cerebral palsy who are now teaching assistants and have other functions in the schools, and that is fantastic because obviously they've got perfect empathy, haven't they? And they're able to do it. We've got a fascinating character in one of our homes in Wales for young adults with cerebral palsy, and we got a guy there who he's pretty well known. I'll name check him. He's Josh, and he's a little bit of my conscience because he's fearless in telling me what needs to be done, and I listen to him because even though he's a pain in the bum, he's so honest about what it feels like to need to be cared for. And he's a guy in his 20s who has to have somebody else help him out with his personal care. And talk to him about what it feels like when an agency worker walks through the door who he's never met before. He's not met them, they've not met him, and they're just about to do personal care. And that is awful. So having people like that, enabling people like that to be on your team, that really, that's great for everybody. That really is really good for everybody.
And no doubt super empowering for did you say Josh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He doesn't need empowering. He empowers himself. I mean, goodness me. He got a British Empire medal, rightly so, for the stuff he does. And on the back of it, he got an invite to the coronation. Yeah, which was great. And of course, he really rubbed it in that he had an invite to the coronation, whereas I didn't. And every time I speak to him, he reminds me of this fact. So yeah, he doesn't need any boosting. He's plenty capable of boosting himself. But having people like that in your organisation is really good, and it's worth the effort of making sure that you are set up to enable them to work with you.
Definitely. In a world of, so we've talked through some of the approach that you take from a care perspective. We talked some of the approach that you've taken from a people and from a HR perspective. Almost talk me through the colliding of those two worlds, because ultimately you're building a particular type of culture and you're trying to encourage certain types of behaviors and discourage other types of behaviors so that flow through that quality of care and the you mentioned empathy earlier and the sympathy and understanding, the looking after people in it across the kind of spectrum of different support that you provide. Like, how do those two worlds come together?
I mean, look, we've got this culture of fairness, actually. So what is fair to everybody, which means that you can make decisions that perhaps are difficult for either the person you're caring for or the staff member, but they are the fair and right thing to do. In fact, it comes back to a very, very fundamental thing, which is care, particularly specialist care, actually no, all care, needs to be populated by people who are good at care and able to care, which is not everybody. Not everybody can do that. And we've had to move on from the situation where frontline care, support workers right down at the front line, was a job you did when you couldn't get another job. And what that meant is you had an awful lot of people actually couldn't do care, rubbish at care, didn't want to do care, shouldn't be anywhere near care. That's where we were. It's where I think the sector was to quite a degree. So we've had to change that, and I think there are signs that it's broadly changing, where we've recognised that not everybody can do care. There's a lot of people that can't do it, and in your culture you have to get everybody on board with that. So you bring somebody in, and on paper they could do the job, but that's irrelevant in care. Are they actually caring? Have they got empathy? Have they got the patience, the engagement? Do they get the joy out of it that we've been talking about? And quite a lot of people just don't and shouldn't. So one of the things that we recognised is super important is to bring fairness into play, where being fair to the people we support and being fair to colleagues does involve removing the people that shouldn't be there. And that's a key to marrying up the culture of a workforce in the right way to deliver good care to the people who we are paid to look after. It comes to the heart of an issue that we need to professionalise care. We need to recognise that there's quite a lot of humans, luckily, who are really, really good at caring for other humans. But there's also quite a lot of humans that just shouldn't be anywhere freaking near it. And recognising that as an organisation is actually quite powerful.
I think it answers the question beautifully, because I was asking about how does those two worlds collide? And if you've got people who, not necessarily bad actors, but they're just not the type of people that should be delivering care, if you've got them there, then that flow through, that culture, that aspirational, the way that you want that to achieve, ultimately it's going to be, in some way, it's going to be hindered by not having the right people around. Because to the extent that you've not got the right people around is going to be the extent that the culture that you've designed and that you've worked so hard to build and instill and empower in the team, ultimately that's going to be holding that back. And it's going to be the people that you care for that, hopefully they don't suffer, but maybe they get everything that they deserve, need, want, desire. And that's a shame. That shouldn't be the set of circumstances where we are. And I think on a not to underplay it, because that's obviously really, really important, but as a bigger picture, as a whole care sector, part of the professionalization is making sure that people do know that it's a really, really, really important job, and it's a really, really, really valuable job, and that if you're that type of person, then that's a meaningful thing. And particularly where there are organizations that I know, Salutem, and this is part of the reason why I believe so strongly in the idea of having whoever it is, in your case Kirsty, really, really pushing the people services and the HR side of things to be able to create a career path for people, and to be able to take people on a journey with you as well, which is really, really important. And again, that then relates back to, if you've got people that they're just doing it to earn a paycheck rather than to make a difference, all that training and all that type of stuff is just going to fall on deaf ears, because they're not going to do anything with it in the first place. And it's a drag rather than a draw.
Yeah. And again, the scale of our organisation enables us to back what you've said there, which is to create a proper career path. And we're trying to do a lot of things that really sort of illustrate that. You can't, not everybody can become a divisional director of adults, but we've enabled it such that if you really have got that ability, you can do that. You can start as a support worker, and then we'll support them through work-based experience and academic experience to take them to the point where they can do that. In fact, yesterday we had our first two graduates come through on our graduate scheme. So brilliant. Again, that's great for the couple of individuals that are on that, but the more important thing is illustrating to everybody else what's possible, and that really helps. But look, this idea of alignment of focus is really, really important right through the organisation, and I would actually take this up to the real sort of corporate-y stuff, so the investors and the bank as well. we've been very, very careful in choosing who can invest with us and who will borrow money from. Because what you can't have is a situation where you are in a awkward position of either satisfying the bank or doing what's right for the people in the frontline care. So you need to make sure structurally that you're not put in that position, which is mostly around the luxury of time, and having that time resource is where is monetary resource, but also having, your bank or your investors understanding what your culture is and what's important to the people at the front line, and that sometimes decisions are made that maybe are not necessarily what the bank would like to see ideally in the short term, but obviously getting them to understand that the long-term outcomes and stability for the front end staff is actually better business. So you have to have everybody lined up right through. If you've got a bank facility that creates problems with something that is a sort of fairly sort of normal thing happening in a care home, you're immediately set to fail. And quite a lot of devices that banks put into their lending criteria are potentially in that mold. So you need to make sure that the bank understand that the nature of the regulator, the nature of your interaction with the local authorities and the NHS, and that some of those things, whilst potentially problematic on the day, are actually in the best interest of the individual you support. Banks can't understand why you're happily giving up a revenue stream for somebody who's been on a massive package, but we're moving them on to a different form of care, which is better for them where they've got to right now, maybe at a lower fee. I mean, a bank would be like, well, what the hell are you doing? This is outrageous. And we're going, no, this is right. This is absolutely what we should be doing. So it's alignment of interest right across the piece, which has been important to us. And, we've been in a fortunate position where we can choose who we work with. And that's been essential.
I've never really thought about it like that before. I've thought about the fact that the banks and investors don't necessarily obviously get it, but I guess I've never really thought about it in the obviously you're living and breathing this, so it's not a surprise that this is something that you take very 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 seriously. But I mean, are we talking from like a banking perspective? Are we talking the banking covenants and things that they would
Yeah.
look to uphold, and the kind of the whole structure around there as well? Yeah, that's
Yep.
really really interesting. I mean, I could almost imagine that actually that feels like that could be a podcast within of itself almost as well, making sure, just going through the process of making sure that the banking, the way that you structure your lending and your investments and all of that type of stuff is complementary and is going to support
Yep.
the best possible business decisions for the people being looked after and for the team as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a key part of the journey. What's that meant for you then at Salutem? How has that then played out for you, having that kind of alignment in place?
In actual hard terms, what it's meant is that, particularly as we've bought portfolios that need work, we've been able to support services through change. So we bought a business, actually third business we bought, 20 services in it. One very big one, which was like 40% of its revenue. And it was slightly abnormal in its setup. It was it's a little bit of a sort of care site, a bit of a village. I think four units registered for 30. So not something you would necessarily commission now, but very, very important to the people that live there. And it had been our eye for a couple of inspections. So obviously, we knew there was work to be done. And we also knew that this is before staffing was an issue. They didn't have enough staff, so they were using agency. This is when nobody used agency, right? So we knew that was a problem. And of course, you take it over, you find actually the problems are thornier than perhaps you thought. There are then two possibilities. You bring new leadership in on that site and you throw a lot of resources at it to turn it round, which probably takes 18 months, 2 years, or you close it. Now,
Mm.
if you're a banker in a pure sense, closing probably looks the better option. But we don't do that. And we particularly wanted to put ourselves in a position where the 18 months and the 2 years and the couple of £100,000 it was going to cost us, actually, it was a couple of 100,000 in sort of cash terms, in overall sort of potential loss terms, it was much, much more than that. But we turned that round. Now it's absolutely thriving. It's got a full, very happy staff complement, wonderfully led by the lovely Michelle, and thriving for all concerned. So to me, that really comes from a place where we were very careful about how we set up our capital structure, and how we could make decisions, and we weren't forced to make a decision by a bank. Compare that. I mean, at the moment, there's a couple of particularly charities, but also some for profits that are essentially having decisions made for them by the banks, and they are closing valid services. So those are the two extremes. So making sure you've got the room to support something through change, and it happens a lot, particularly in our children's services. You have to support them through change. And now that the service I was referencing, the organisation supported it through its time. Now it is providing resources to support others, not just financially. That the manager of that site actually helped us with the turnaround of a couple of the thorny ones in Cornwall. So she used her experience to go and help turn others round. So that's super important. And there's some organisations out there at the moment who are sadly not in that position where they've got a service that's super important to the people living there, but because of their debt situation, they're closing it, and that is awful. And I've worked really hard with colleagues to make sure we are not put in that position.
So it's fair to say, since your transition from the finance world into the care sector, you've covered some ground. I hear that you've won some awards as well. Talk me
Yeah.
through some of those key milestones as well.
Wow. Actually, do you know, the milestones to me, the ones that really sort of rammed home were, actually there was a recent one. So the thing we did in Cornwall, that turnaround, which was difficult, so difficult that your it stressed our relationships with the commissioners and the CQC for a period. It was way worse than any of us had anticipated. So to sit down with the lead commissioners in Cornwall and for them to say, "You guys have done a really, really good job. We couldn't be more pleased," and to have them acknowledge and to acknowledge to ourselves that we had successfully saved that business, that was great. To get to the 5-year milestone, having taken over scope, and have only lost one small day service in all of that's special. But then the acknowledgement that the individuals who came with that, who were very, very anti us when we were first introduced to them, aside from the upset that they thought it was going to be Virgin Healthcare. This is like 6 years ago, right? They thought it was going to be Virgin Healthcare taking over. So to find that it wasn't Richard Branson, it was me, was deeply disappointing to them, obviously. But they were, well, we're not going to work for a bunch of bankers. And then a few years later, for those same people to go, "I'm so pleased that Salutem took over scope." And you get that from the parents. I mean, those are the things that are great. Actually, I mean, COVID was an awful time for everybody, but I actually think that the way that the Salutem team dealt with it was beyond excellent, right across everybody. And obviously, there's the stories of frontline workers who went to live in the services for a period to protect their families and the people they look after. But there were stories equivalent to that right across everything. But we functioned as a team incredibly well through that, which saved lives. That is the ultimate, isn't it? So we did lose some people. I think we lost 9, and bear in mind we look after 1,800. So by any metric, sad though those few losses were, it could have been way worse had we not reacted well. So that was good, and we got a lot of credit and kudos out of that. So that was, I really felt that was the representation of how the organisation has made itself strong and resilient. So yeah, that was good.
I know that you're too modest to toot your own horn, but wasn't there a certain appreciation from the crown not so long ago for yourself?
Yeah. So yeah, I got given a little gongy thing, which is very lovely and much appreciated. And it was, they don't give them to organisations; they give them to individuals. But it was very, very much, I got the award on behalf of Salutem. And for those who've had these things, it is great, and the pomp is wonderful. And it was particularly special because the award was made at Windsor Castle, and our offices are in Windsor, so that's great. So turn up on a day, and there's this little wrinkle in the day where you don't know who is going to do your presentation, and you don't find out until you get there. And I drove up the Long Walk, which is that lovely tree-lined avenue up to Windsor Castle. Drove up there, and they stop you at the gate, and you stick mirrors under your car and all that kind of stuff. And the policeman on the gate, it's obviously their lovely little game they love to play. They know who's doing the award that day, so it's their gift that they give out. They tell you who is giving the awards that day, and it was Princess Anne, which was really lovely because Princess Anne has got a strong relationship with our sector. She's an
Mm.
active trustee for Home Farm Trust, and whether you are a monarchist or you support the crown or not, it doesn't matter when these things are done so well and done for all the right reasons. And the way she conducted that day was, I just found it's mind blowing. She was 72 at the time. It was a couple of years ago. She did a 2.5 hour stint that morning, standing straight, bolt upright for 2.5 hours, and she gave everybody like 2.5 minutes of her time. So when it got to my bit, and she's been, seeing people. The guy ahead of me had done something in education. There was some people who, a very, very wide selection of people from different backgrounds doing different things, celebrating for different reasons. And you get to my bit and you go, boy, I mean, she probably knows my name. And you get there and she'd obviously been briefed. And we had a 2.5 minute conversation about Salutum and Home Farm Trust and the shared issues we were having at that time around staffing. And
Wow.
I was blown away that she bothered to do that. But and she did it for everybody, and she would have had something specific to them. So that was great. But that was because Salutum did such a good job of looking after everybody through COVID, and it's very, very nice for me. And then we had the worst prepared surprise dinner that night. It couldn't have been less of a surprise had they put it up in neon, and obviously I had to pretend to be surprised, which is great. But no, it was very lovely, and we very much build that rightly as yeah, Salutum got it. So we are Salutum MBE. So that's kind of cool, right? Yeah,
That's
it's
pretty
good.
cool. That's pretty cool. So,
Yeah,
last and very important question. So, Mum wasn't super impressed with the whole role in the finance world. Do you think that
no,
she's more proud now after all of the care stuff that you've done, after all the wonderful care, the turnaround,
yeah,
the appreciation from Princess Anne? Do you reckon
yeah.
she's more happy about the situation?
No, no, no. I couldn't be. She couldn't be less impressed. I think she thinks I work in a care home, probably. which would be
Okay.
good. No, she's deeply. No, that's not true. I'm sure she is impressed. Although when I did tell her about the MBE, she did stick true to form, and then rather than say congratulations, well done, that's really lovely, she told me about four other people that she knew had had one, which obviously put me firmly in my place. So yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just doing all of this to impress my mum. Who knows? But
There's, there's a big part of me that thinks that John Godden, as you stand in front of me today, is part of the reason why you are the person that you are and you've achieved what you've done. It's because your mum's always been a little bit like,
yeah,
I
and
reckon there's probably some more in there. So God bless your mum for being a legend and pushing you in the way that she has, because
absolutely,
she's
absolutely.
helped you achieve an awful lot, I think. So, John, a pleasure as always. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Obviously, I've been aware of lots of different parts of the Salutum journey, and a lot of what we've talked about today has been new stuff that I wasn't aware of, that I think other care providers and members of the Care Leaders Network will get endless inspiration from. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Simon.